Did you do the drum? Okay, we're going to get started.
Is he going to do? Where is the drummer?
Okay. So I want to thank you all for coming. We appreciate that on this nice day, you've taken the time to come in and listen to our fashion show, our Wareham of 1776. So thank you for coming to our presentation to Wareham, a 1776 fashion show with historic stories of Wareham's notable citizens from the Revolutionary War area. I am a member of the Wareham Minutemen and Militia Company. I want to thank you on behalf of them for being here. I have Kathy Potter from the Rehoboth 13th Regiment. We work really well with both Rehoboth and Fairhaven. Over the years, you kind of lose members in your organization, and so it's nice to have other units that we work with and do things with them as well. We learn from each other, and especially when it comes to sewing. It's nice to have people that know what is correct and what's not correct and keep us on the go, because if we do a historically accurate reenactment, we need to have hand-sewn outfits. And so Kathy's our historian that keeps us straight when it comes to sewing. So both of our groups are comprised of reenactors who portray the time of the American Revolution, which would be from 1775 to 1791. Each town would have their own group of militia who would march under the command of their own officers from that town. Our program today will focus on the men in Wareham from women who lived during the time of the Revolutionary War, and we'll highlight some of the names who might sound familiar to you, and we'll show you some of the clothing that they may have worn back then. During that period in history, fabric was very valuable, and linen was cheaper than cotton to purchase. So therefore, you're going to see that many articles of clothing were made from linen. The design of clothing itself was made to adapt for the station in life that you were part of, and this was especially evident in women's clothing. Only the very well-to-do person could afford more than one outfit, and silk was reserved for the higher class lady. You will notice that on women's clothing, they did not have any buttons, and they were held together with large pins. And if you don't get them in properly, sometimes you stick yourself and you end up with a little bit of blood on your fingers, but you want to be careful when you pin, but the women's clothing are only pinned. So we want to say thank you to the Wareham Cultural Council and the Community Events Committee for the support, to the members of the Wareham Minutemen and Militia Companies for sponsoring this event, and to the members of the Rehoboth 13th, Fairhaven Village Militia, WCTV, and all of the volunteers who helped us put this together today. So the colonial militia, this term goes back to the time of the Pilgrims, believe it or not, when a militia were formed to protect the colonials from the Native Americans. In a record dated 1676, it states that the Wareham settlers along the Rochester and Middleborough were driven back by the Indians that were attacking the villages and burning homes in this area. At that time, they were required to respond in a minute, and so that's where Minutemen started in the early days. Some records indicate that 9 men from Wareham fought in the King George's War in 1744 to 1748. So the soldiers from Wareham go back even before the Revolutionary War. There is a report showing that 9 men from Wareham participated in the French and Indian War in 1754 to 1763. They were Barnabas Bates, John Bates, Jabez Bessie, Joshua Bessie, Joseph Bessie, Samuel Bessie, Ebenezer Churbuck, Oliver Norris, Henry Sanders, and sadly, this is where Samuel Bessie was killed in action. So some of those names might be familiar to you because there are still those families that still have those surnames today. 5 other Wareham men served in the Northern Army and assisted in the taking of Canada. 4 Native American Indian men from Wareham were there as well and fought hostile Indians for the English and the Canadian frontier. They were Jabez Wickett, Joe Joseph, Saul Joseph, and Jesse Webquish. Jesse Webkish was present and witnessed General Wolfe fall at the capture of Quebec. A descendant of Jesse Webkish was later acknowledged as being the lawful owner of Wicket's Island. How many of you know where Wicket's Island is in Onset? So it goes way back. On March 17, 1775, at a town meeting, the town voted to purchase 6 guns for its Minutemen to use due to the British movement and increased troops in and around Boston. Nathan Bassett was paid £24, 16 shillings, 6 pence to purchase them. He was also directed to continue to oversee the militia and improve their training in the field. They were required to meet on a regular basis. They met at a muster field, a field that now is, if you go up Main Street, to the left of the Deacon's School. On April 19, 1775, Wareham received the first call to respond to an alarm, and the Wareham men mustered. 2 companies were formed, and the first group of militia marched to Marshfield with the report that the King's troops landed there and were laying waste to the countryside, killing women, children, and burning anything in their way. The second group to muster was a company of Minutemen who responded as well. Once they arrived, they learned that it was a false alarm and that the British hadn't taken Marshfield. The first company, which responded under Captain Israel Fearing, consisted of 6 officers and 12 privates. Sorry, I have pirates on my brain because I'm doing something else in a month. The company had 9 officers and 29 privates. These 2 companies had a total of 15 officers and 41 privates for a total of 56 in all. A militia company from Wareham would eventually march to Boston and were sent to Dorchester Heights to keep an eye on the British Navy, who were anchored in Boston Harbor. We believe this is the company that later were the ones who would be in the group that accompanied General George Washington to the battle in New York. On April 22, 1775, Massachusetts declared that they should assemble 30,000 men for the defense of the colonies. Records show that Rhode Island raised 15,000 men, Connecticut 6,000, and New Hampshire 2,000, and they all marched to Boston. So we're going to talk a little bit about the flags of the different organizations, the different companies. So Kathy, if you want to take over with the flag.
Just a minute. Okay, now you're going to get your flag talk, all right? So everybody has to look up on the stage, if you would, please. And I have some of our wonderful helpers there that are holding out the flags. We're going to tell you the history of a couple of these flags, and you probably don't know too much about them. Ladies, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The first one on my list is the Taunton flag. So you're going to have to put those other flags down, please, and bring up the Taunton flag. The flag of Taunton, Massachusetts is also known as the Taunton Liberty and Union flag, and is the flag from the city of Taunton. This flag was first adopted in 1774 and was since adopted as the flag of Taunton. It consists of a red ensign and the flag of the Great Britain in the canton, defaced with the words Liberty and Union across the lower portion. The flag was first adopted on the 21st of October of 1774 after the Sons of Liberty forced out American loyalists from Taunton. Reverend Caleb Bonham proposed a flag for a symbol of opposition to the crown and support of American independence. In commemoration of the patriots, erected a liberty pole, and it was 112 feet tall. That's about 34 feet high, guys. Outside of the Taunton Courthouse and the house of Tory loyalist Daniel Leonard. It was then that they raised a red ensign with the words Liberty and Union sewn across it. The design of the Liberty and Union and the Union Jack on the ensign predates the Union of Great Britain and Ireland. Okay, so we did something right in Taunton. We got an early flag out there, folks. and it did not include the St. Patrick's saltire to represent Ireland at that point. The Taunton flag was one of the first flags used within the 13 colonies and expressed dissentation against the crown. It was also a symbol underlying loyalty of the crown and the Union flag, which was viewed as the king's colors. The wife of William McKinstry, the only loyalist permitted to remain, expressed. I got to turn pages, just a minute, folks. I got to get caught up here. Disdain with the Taunton flag, and was reposed. A female patriot dragged her from her house and forced her to march in front of the Liberty pole where the flag was flying. The latest version of the Taunton flag was created and includes Liberty and Union slogan, and it's called the Union flag. The next flag we have over here that the ladies are holding up, it's two versions of the pine tree flag. Most people in New England, even if you're not familiar with the Liberty and Union, you're familiar with the pine tree flag. The pine tree flag, or the Appeal to Heaven flag, was one of the flags used during the American Revolution. The flag, which featured a pine tree with the motto, "An appeal to heaven," or less frequently, an appeal to God, was originally used by a squadron of 6 frigates that were commissioned under George Washington's authority as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in 1775. It was the official maritime flag of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At this point, the words were removed, "An appeal to heaven," and you just see there is a pine tree on a red background, all right? The script was removed in 1971. It had been on the flag until that time, and it is used by the state Navy vessels and privateers, if there's any left, sailing around in Massachusetts, all right? The next flag we're going to, ladies, is a guidon. It's not a regular flag, and this is for your local town of Wareham. Okay, this is something the militia would carry to identify the group they were with. There seems to be no record of what the Wareham Minutemen and Militia Company flag might have looked like. Certainly no pictures. So after some research and seeing what other units had backed, and some of the units of today, their flags were designed reflecting the fact that Wareham had a first company, along with others. All companies were part of the Plymouth 4th Regiment, which was initially part of the Continental Army. White background with blue trim seems to be the appropriate colors for an American combination, and it's used in abbreviation with lettering that would have been stylish for that time period. So basically, when your Wareham militia goes out, they carry this guidon, as most units do. They do not have an official flag. All right, and the last flag I'm going to tell you folks about is one that, comes here with me, and this is the flag of, it started out as the Rehoboth Minutemen, and then General Washington came up to Concord, and he decided, all right, we're in Cambridge, we're going to get rid of all these little militia companies that are together with all their captains and sergeants, and we're going to make them a continental unit. So what he did is he took militia companies from a couple places. He took Timothy Walker's from Rehoboth, David Brewer's from down on the Cape, and Joseph Reed's from up around Waltham and Wareham and all, and he made them into the 13th Continental Regiment. The 13th Regiment is one of the few regiments that does have an accurate record of their flag. You will see it is 5 by 5, and it is silk, and it has an appeal to heaven on it. And this is the flag that this regiment carried from Massachusetts. They marched down to New York with Washington for the battle at Long Island, and then they marched into Pennsylvania. And on Christmas night, they crossed the river with General Washington to Trenton. They went back, and then they crossed it again, and they went to Princeton, and they were dissolved. The regiment was disbanded. All of their enlistments were up. So that is your flag history, and if people have questions later on, we would be glad to try to answer them. At this point, we would like to have some models come up, and we're going to show you all the clothes people in colonial times had to wear. It's much different than when we get dressed today and we put on our jeans, sneakers, and sweatshirt and we go out of the house. Clothes were a very important thing. All right, let me see if I can read this all properly, and then you will understand what Miss Amy is wearing there. Miss Amy, we thank you for coming out here, okay? She is wearing a chemise. That is that white garment that she has on, and it is made from linen, and it is worn next to the skin. It could serve as a nightgown, and it was durable enough to repeatedly withstand the rugged laundry process of the 18th century. And you will learn about the laundry process a little later in the show. Bathing and washing clothes was not practiced as it is today. It was important to have a layer that could be changed regularly to protect the outer clothing that was close to the body. She has stockings on. These are over her knee, and they could be made of cotton, wool, or silk. Sometimes they were decorated at the ankle with a design called a clock. Ribbon garters were used below the knee to hold up the stockings. Do you have garters on, Miss Amy? Yes. They will hold your stockings up. Then you don't have saggy stockings, okay? Most 18th century shoes were of one of three styles: the slipper shoe, the pump, or the mule, and then they were fastened with buckles, clasps, or ties, okay? Sorry, a lot of pages here. Okay, the next thing she has on is a set of stays. Stays were most proper for 18th century cone-shaped silhouette. Nearly every woman wore them, from the fashionable ladies who required stays to give themselves a stylish figure and posture, to the lowly working women who wore them for support for their back and their bust. And you can see she has stays on, and they are laced together in the front and in the back, and they do kind of pull you all in, and they do give you some support. All right, Miss Amy, do you have a pocket with you? Okay. A pocket is basically the ladies' 18th century version of a pocketbook. You didn't have pockets like we have them in a coat or a pants or anything today. These were bags that were tied around your waist, okay? And they had slits in them, so you could put your hands right in them. Remember, in those days, the ladies didn't have a lot of stuff to carry with them. You know, there was none of the stuff we shove in our pocketbooks today. The pockets could be single or double. Some were made to go around your waist with tape or the ribbon, and you could reach through them, which we will show you later on, through your petticoat, so you could store anything that you would like in your pocket there. They could be made of various materials, you know, and they could be embroidered, they could have some patchwork, or they could be made out of plain or printed cotton or linen, or even canvas in some respects. Okay, the next item that Amy is going to put on, since she's already got all these undergarments, she's going to put on a petticoat, okay? We call this a skirt these days, and it was a petticoat in those days. Any, okay, the petticoat is a separate skirt worn with a gown or a jacket. Unless specifically made to match a gown, they would be made of plain linen or wool, or finer worsted wool or silk. Sometimes they were even quilted. Women wore a minimum of two. The under petticoat was made of wool, linen, or cotton, and were used for added warmth during the winter months. As you can see, the petticoat has drawstrings on it. The reason they had all these drawstrings is women's bodies changed. About every 22 months they had a baby, okay? So this way, your petticoat fit you depending upon what layer of life your body was in. As you can see, it's not a quick process. It takes a while. Now she's probably got about 5 or 6 layers around her waist, you know, and it's not quite done yet. Almost done. All right. After this, we're going to go on to her scarf. Okay. The modesty scarf is a square or a triangle. It provides a period-correct covering up, so you feel too exposed with the low 18th century necklines. It fills in the opening of the throat and into the gown and your jacket. It keeps you warm in the cold weather, and if you wet down a linen one, the water will help evaporate and will keep you cooler in the summer. Yes, I have to attest to that. It was 100 degrees at a camp last summer, and it does work. If you wet that linen scarf down, it does help you, you know. According to most pictorial sources, nearly all women wore a modesty scarf. As you can see, it is tucked into her stays at this point. The next thing she will add to her assembly will be her jacket. Jacket was made out of shaped panels closely fitted to the upper body and flared with the skirt. It often has no seaming at the waist, so it is longer beyond your waist. It can be closed with pins. Some of them are closed with lacing, never with buttons, okay? Women didn't rank buttons. So you could have lacing, you could have hooks and eyes, or you could have pins. Okay, the next item she's going to be putting on is her apron. Depending upon the class status, apron ranges from plain linen work aprons to lovely sheer linen or cotton semi-dressed aprons were white or off-white, and they could have embroidery on them. Also, you will notice on her head she is wearing a cap. A cap was worn by women and girls to cover their heads. It was a practical piece that allowed the head to be dressed without styling the hair. Sounds pretty good. You can just shove it up there, you know. And at sometime it protects the hair from everyday dirt and dust, and the hair doesn't need to be washed too frequently. A hat was tied on the cap when going out. The cap would be made of linen, cotton, lace, and ruffles could be added to the top. The style of cap that this lady is wearing is straw, and you can see it is dressed up with a very pretty satin ribbon on the top of it, and she is now all set to go out in public. Do you have anything else there, Miss Amy, that you would like to share with us? So rather than throwing on your clothes in 1 minute, this is the way a proper young lady would be dressed in the colonial period and the many, many layers of clothes she had to put on. So we thank you very much, Miss Amy. Thank you. All right, now we've seen the ladies. Now we're going to see the guys, okay? They like to be in charge of everything. And sometimes we let them think they were. But they also had a long time to get themselves dressed. Okay, our model here is standing in front of you with a 18th century shirt. You can see it goes up to his neck. It has long sleeves. It buttons at the end of the sleeve. And it has a small slit down in the middle. This was so that the shirt collar was wide enough to go over your head, all right? These shirts were quite long. Let me see what this says about them here. A typical male outfit consists of a long linen shirt. This is similar to a lady's chemise, not just the same though, but it was a little shorter, but also that the man could wear this as bedclothes at night. The garment served as his underclothing, okay? He also has on socks. Over the knee socks, they could be made of cotton, wool, or silk. The weather gentlemen would often have them embroidered at the ankle with a design called clocks. The socks would be held up by leather straps and a buckle. At it, right there. Okay, the next thing he has on is breeches. If you've heard the phrase, "you're getting too big for your breeches," this is where they came from. These breeches, fall front breeches, narrow fall front style was common. They were made with front pockets, a back gusset for the expanding or retracting of your waist size, pewter buttons, a full cut seat, and button knee bands on the side. I am told that men in our unit that breeches were extremely comfortable to wear, and they were made to give you lots of room. Unlike the ladies who were kind of closed in, the guys had really comfy pants. They were so lucky. All right, the next thing that our model is going to put on is a waistcoat. These were worn by a lot of people. You might call it a vest. We call it a waistcoat. The waistcoat looks something like our modern-day vests. Unlike the ladies of the time, men did have buttons on their clothing. A waistcoat typically had 12 buttons or more. The waistcoat from this time could also have sleeves. Note that, again, like the ladies, the waistcoat has 2 pockets in the front. The back of the garment usually has back lacing to ensure them the versatility of the garment. This one does not have a back lacing, but some of them did. Maybe we can show you them later on. This way, where the ladies need it for pregnancy and non-pregnancy times, the men needed it for heavy eating times and not a lot of food times. So they went back and forth also, okay? Next, I would ask you to bring your coat on, sir. The man's coat was full skirted and was at knee length. This meant the coat had large pleats in the back that allowed him to lift the back of the coat up when he was sitting. It was made from linen and was lined with cotton. During the winter months, a man may wear a great coat, also called a watch coat or a boat coat, as it was called. This was popular with the sailors' population. All right, I guess we'll move on to your shoes that you have on, sir. Shoes in the mid-18th century shoes were moderately square-toed, black leather with leather soles and heels. Really good for walking on wet grass, leather heels and soles, I assure you. Straight lasted, no left or right. Buckles were made in brass. The design of the buckle would depend upon your status. The wealthier gentleman could have buckles finished with even a floral pattern engraved on the grass. Okay, also he has to have a hat. The hat was the most people recognize is the tricorner, shortened or tricorn hat for men. The hat was made out of heavy-duty rabbit fur felt and was lined with linen and had trim of worsted wool tape for a smooth look. This was usually worn by the well-to-do gentleman. Most hats were made of felt. The tricorn also could be decorated with a rosette cockade with a pewter button in the left side. The cockade would represent of different colors in the military order of officers. A cockade on a hat, if you were in the militia or if you were in the Continental Army, okay, yellow would indicate a captain, green a lieutenant, and red for a major. Other styles of hats included workman's cap, knit cap, voyager's cap, and hats made from straw for the warmer summer months. It was considered proper etiquette for a man to always remove his hat upon entering a home. Okay, and some accessories that we are going to ask our gentleman to put on. Okay, a man could include a blanket roll if needed, okay? This would be if you were traveling, you'd have to take a blanket roll with you. This is where you would have your blanket all rolled up, and it would be on a strap that was across your shoulders. A haversack could also be carried for personal items. Do you have a haversack there, son? No, no haversack. Okay, well, we'll deal with that with somebody else. Okay. Do you have a cartridge box? He doesn't have a cartridge box? Oh, he does, okay. A cartridge box would have paper cartridges filled with black powder, and a canteen of water or whiskey would also be carried along with his musket and his bayonet. So there's his canteen going on there. Many times it did have a stronger beverage in it, depending upon what the day was going to bring. And this is a bayonet, which you will find out about a little later on. That was the long knife that was at the end of the musket. It was called a bayonet, and it was a very versatile piece during the American Revolution because your musket didn't always fire, but your bayonet always worked. Would you like to show them your gun? I mean, not on my list here, is it? No. And you have a Charleville musket there? Yes, okay. This is the type of musket that came from France. Many Charlevilles were given to the American colonies later in the war, and that way we use Charlevilles as well as brown vests. We used homemade muskets that were called fowling pieces and many other types of things. But as you can see, it also took the man a while to get dressed. If he was a Minuteman, he'd have a big problem. He'd have to get it done pretty quickly, you know. And but it wasn't that Minutemen had to be dressed in a minute. They were usually the young people who were unattached without families or responsibilities, so they could leave at a moment's notice also. Okay, thank you very much, Gary. You're a very good model. Some of the stuff wasn't there. I had to stop. I mean, okay, you're up to Major Faring?
Yep. So, okay, now we're going to start to get into some of the names that you'll be familiar with. So I'm going to bring out Major Israel Faring and his wife. In 1720, Israel Faring moved to Wareham from Hingham and settled near Red Brook. In 1722, he became a justice of the peace. Israel Faring was the leader of the Wareham Minutemen and Militia, and he was one of the first to respond on April 19, 1775, to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and it is said that his wife Lucy tried to stop him, but was unsuccessful as he ran, leaving the house. She grabbed his clothing and ripped it. It's believed that she may have been a Tory. On December 15, 1776, he was a senior major in the Plymouth County 4th Regiment, which helped to defend Howland's Ferry near Tiverton, Rhode Island. In September of 1778, at the age of 30 years old, he was the officer who helped save Fairhaven from an attack by the British by persuading the Fairhaven troops to stay and defend their town. In this battle, he used some Indian tactics that surprised the British and forced them to retreat. He was described as having a striking and imposing personal presence, tall, erect, with courtly manners, and a face that in old age retained the freshness of youth. Israel and his wife Lucy had 7 children, but only 3 of their sons survived. He was discharged from service in 1781 by the state of Massachusetts. Early in his life, he was commissioned as a justice of the peace by King George, and it has been said that he was a person who rode to Boston with the first set of incorporation papers for Wareham. He passed away in March of 1826 at the age of 78. The 3 surviving sons, Benjamin, Israel, Noah, also served in the militia and responded to alarms. Each of his sons also held a variety of other positions within the town of Wareham over the next few years. So you want to describe?
Okay, well, I'd like to tell you something about what Major is wearing. As you can see, he has on a frock coat. It is a civilian coat. Early in the war, there were very few uniforms. Officers had them of their own design. His outfit looks very appropriate for a militia. He is carrying a flintlock musket. He has on a large cartridge box on his side. He is wearing boots, indicating his rank as an officer. On his other side, he is carrying both a bayonet and a sword. Since he was an officer, he would carry a sword. It could be used for defense, but you know, it was also a sign of his ranking. On his head, he has a bicornered hat. It's not a tricornered. It's made in a little different form, and you can see it has a round circle on it in black ribbon. That is called an alliance cockade, and that is indicating he was a member of the American forces. Now, his lady is dressed in a very nice, and she is dressed in a petticoat of a gold-colored linen. She has a navy blue jacket on, and on her hat, it indicates a ribbon that would correspond with her lovely jacket. She also wearing a modesty piece around her neck, and she has a chemise on, which you can see peeking out below the sleeves of her jacket. In colonial days, ladies never showed their elbows. It was considered very, very rude. Didn't matter how low your bust jacket was, but never show your elbows. So she is properly attired. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. So the Faring Tavern was built by Isaac Bumpus in 1690, and then was later sold to Israel Faring some years later. The Faring Tavern will be open Saturdays during June, July, and August from 1 to 4, and Sunday by appointment only. If you have not visited the Faring Tavern, it might be something that you want to take a weekend and go over and take a tour of it. It's really very interesting, a wonderful piece of Wareham's history, and a lot of the furnishings are still period correct. So if you haven't been, we encourage you to go over and take a tour. So next we have the Reverend and Honorable Noble Warren Everett. Born in Woodbury, Connecticut, he graduated from Yale in 1772. Who knew? Who knew that they would have gone to college back then, and locally? He was voted to serve as clergy on June 3rd, 1782. He was the third gentleman to serve as a minister for the town. In his agreement with the town, he was given land to build a house with all of the specifications as to size, etc. His salary was 56 pounds of silver money, half paid in April and the other half in October. The property had a meadow which included wood for the maintenance of his fires. In 1791, the salary was increased to 60 pounds, and later in 1800, it was increased to $350. He served as chaplain during the Revolutionary War and was present at the Battle of White Plains, New York. He taught at a private school and was well-versed in 3 languages, Latin, Greek, and French. He wrote many of his speeches in shorthand. He once left his church to go fight a fire in Plymouth, and most of the men from the congregation followed him. In the British attack of Wareham in 1814, it was he who carried the keg of powder to the assembled militia and then returned to his home to get his gun. Someone once described him as justly esteemed, sound in doctrine, prudent in discipline, and upright in conduct. At some time in his life, he ran a fulling mill. He died in office on December 30th of 1819. His grandson, also a Reverend Noble Warren Everett, was instrumental in keeping and recording some of the most thorough history of Wareham, which is printed in a Plymouth County history book printed in 1884, from which we got most of our information for today's event. It was a book that I got off of eBay, and it tells the story of a lot of the towns in Plymouth County and goes way back to the 1600s. So a lot of this information came from that, and it's pretty accurate as we've researched it.
Okay, if we're looking at this reverend, we don't see him all dressed in black. Not all reverends wore black at that time. Clothing was limited, and it was very expensive. So you may have had, a reverend may have had a black outfit for Sunday service, but basically he would have worn regular civilian clothes. As you can see, Han, he has a 3/4 length jacket with buttons down the front, It also has buttons of decorations on the end of his sleeves. And he has buttons on the flaps that go over his pockets. So therefore, he has a number of buttons on his outfit. He is carrying a brown bess musket, and he has on a tri-cornered hat. As you can see, his shoes are typical colonial shoes with brass buckles on them, and he is dressed in this particular outfit more as a civilian, although everyone in town, I'm quite sure, was familiar with him as the pastor of their church. And apparently he did a very good job and was a very bright man. So we thank you for coming out, Reverend.
So that,
Oh!
as you can tell, we have a lot of fun when we do these encampments. So Reverend Noble Everett, as you probably have put together the Everett School. So, you know, people probably didn't realize that's how the Everett School came to be named. You know, he was very well educated and wanted to make sure that the community had someone that could pass on a good education to the families. So we have Reverend Roland Thatcher. Reverend Roland Thatcher was born in Barnstable. He graduated from Harvard in 1733 and was called to serve the town on September 10th, 1739, as their first ordained preacher. He received a settlement of 300 pounds and additionally would receive 100 pounds in salary. He was ordained on December 26, 1739. When he started his congregation, it consisted of 15 males and 28 females. After serving the town for more than 35 years, he passed away on February 18, 1775. During his lifetime, he served on many different town committees. Most notable was the Committee of Correspondence, Inspection and Safety, which oversaw the needs of the militia. His house was situated on Main Street, moved across the street, and it was later moved again to Cranberry Highway, just north of Tyhonet Road. So if you came down Main Street, went over the railroad tracks, and went out onto Cranberry Highway, if you look to the left of Tyhonet Road, that would have been the house that he lived in. And then you realize that we also had, or we still have, Roland Thatcher Hall next to the Congregational Church. We had the Roland Thatcher Nursing Home, which is now Wareham, I forget, it's on Tremont Road there. So again, there is a connection of how these things were named.
Okay, as you will see, Reverend Thrasher is dressed in a long black robe? Okay, we'll call it a robe. Okay, which was probably what he would have worn at church services when he was conducting his job as your minister. Underneath that, he probably had civilian clothes just like the other man, but he did portray the minister, and it was in a long black robe. As a matter of fact, there were so many reverends that went with the American Army that the British always said that we had a regiment of black robes because there were so many ministers that came with the army, and that was a indication when they were talking about this kind of garment. But most of the people that were pastors and traveled with the army wore military uniforms or civilian clothes. I don't know where the British got the black robe idea, but that's what they said about us. So I guess we were very religious people back then, and all of our units had their own reverend with them, which is a wonderful thing when you're at war. You truly need that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And when we do encampments, we generally are there for a weekend. And yes, we do, we show up on Friday night, we set up our tents, we set up our cook fires, we stay all weekend, and we do have a service on Sunday morning so that we don't miss church. Next, we have Reverend Ebenezer Burgess. Reverend Ebenezer Burgess helped to prepare a petition for legislature to the General Court for the incorporation of Wareham. He served as a lieutenant in the militia and fought in the Battle of Howland's Ferry near Tiverton, Rhode Island, along with many other men from Wareham. He was another citizen who held many positions in the town, one that being a selectman for a number of years. He graduated from Brown University in 1809. So you might think of Burgess Point. So this was how Burgess Point came along through the families and got to be named.
Yes, and as you can see from his attire, he is also dressed as a local Minuteman. He does not have on the black robe of a reverend. As I said, that was not worn at all the times, although many of the pictures you see, it seems to show it that way. But most of them wore civilian clothes because they probably had to do work on their farms and everything else to keep everything together. He is wearing a green waistcoat and he has a checked shirt on. He does not have a white one. Checked shirts were also very popular. If you could turn around, sir, he is carrying a wooden canteen. Okay, on the side of his, on his other side, he has a leather bag. It was usually called a hunting bag, and in his hand, he is carrying the Bible, the good book. So he would have it with him at any time that he needed to preach to the troops to give them encouragement or consolation. He is carrying a Brown Bess musket, which was very common earlier in the war. Charlottesville came on a little bit later, but he is properly attired for his place in the militia and his place as a reverend during the American Revolution. Thank you, sir.
Next, we have Edward Bumpus. Edward Bumpus, being a principal inhabitant of Wareham, was asked by the General Court to call a meeting in town where he was elected the first town moderator. So you preceded me by 100 years?
200?
200 years?
200.
200 years.
Yeah, 200.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, baby,
Yeah.
haven't we?
Women have
Women have.
women power.
Women
Okay.
power,
All right.
okay. This first town meeting was held on August 6, 1739, and believe it or not, I have been asked by the Mass Moderators Association if I knew who the first town moderator was, and I was so happy to be able to say, yes, I do, and when he was elected. So his house stands today on Main Street across from Gateway Plaza up on the hill. If you see there's a house that's being renovated, it's got all green on the front. That's where Edward Bumpus lived.
Okay, we will like to show you that Edward Bumpus is a little older than the ministers that we've had out here. So, but all during the time from Miles Standish on, the towns were required to have a standing militia, and they had to drill at certain times during the year. You will see he is using a short pattern Brown Bess musket, and he is dressed in the clothes that were appropriate for that time. He has a wooden canteen. He has a cartridge box. If you could turn around, sir. Okay. He is also carrying a leather hunting bag, and if you can see on his hip, there is a bayonet, which of course was one of the main killing weapons of the American Revolution. As I said, muskets did not fire all of the time. He is wearing a typical tricorner hat, and he has a long red waistcoat on. His colonial shirt is white in color, and he has high socks and buttons on his breeches, as you can see, going from the top of his socks up his leg. Okay, he is also carrying a hatchet, which most of the other people were not carrying. To be in the militia from the time of Miles Standish on, you had to have a long knife, you had to have a bayonet, or you had to have a hatchet. So he has he filled almost all those requirements. Okay, thank you very much.
Next, we have Captain John Kendrick. John Kendrick was born in 1740 on a farm in East Harwich on Cape Cod. Kendrick went to sea at the age of 14 on a whaler. He served briefly in Western New York during the 7 Years' War, and on the night of December 10th, 1773, he was part of the legendary band that boarded 2 East Indian Company ships and dumped 324 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. And actually, I think it's this year they will be celebrating the dumping of the Boston Tea Party. So that's an event, if you have any interest in history, you might want to look and take in. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting and very well done. Early in the Revolutionary War, with his ship, the Fanny, under contract with a secret mission from the Continental Congress, he smuggled guns and powder for the war effort. During the rest of the war, he operated the Fanny and another ship, Count d'Estaing, as privateers, harassing the British shipping through the Atlantic. In 1778, he was sent by Congress with the encouragement of George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson on a voyage of exploration with 2 ships, the Columbia and the Lady Washington, to the northwest coast and the Columbia River to establish a presence for the United States. There he set up trade with the Northwest natives, China, Hawaii, and eventually opened up the trade with Japan. He was killed when a British ship accidentally shot a hole through his ship when he was in Pearl Harbor. So we have the Kendrick Museum, which is currently going under restoration. The Wareham Historical Society owns that museum. They have gone for a wonderful grant. They're going to be restoring that. Once it's restored, I really encourage you to attend. We are going to be meeting with some of the high school students and talking specifically about John Kendrick and his explorations at the end of this month, I believe. So we'll be bringing the students in to talk to them. And here she comes again. This is our laundress.
I'm sorry, we need Major Kendrick back here for a moment.
Oh, no.
Yes, I do. Yes, we need him back, yes.
I'll just be over here.
Okay. You can have him when I'm done, all right?
Yeah.
I'll be waiting.
Yeah.
Okay, Major Kendrick is attired as a sailor of the colonial period. You can see his outfit is completely different than the regular militia, infantry, pastors, and everything else. He has an entirely different type of outfit on. Instead of wearing breeches, which he has on, underneath there, he has a pair of slops on. Slops? Oh. Slops were used because sailors' lives were very, very dirty, and they wore them kind of to keep them warm and to keep their other clothes clean. He has on a check shirt, a blue and white check shirt, and he has a red scarf around his neck. He is quite colorful. He wears a blue sailor's jacket with pewter buttons on it. This was used both by the Americans and the British sailors. They both wore the same type of blue jackets and a similar type of slops and everything else. He is carrying a blunderbuss. This is a short gun that would be very much advantageous if you were on a ship. If you had a real long gun, it might just get in the way. If you could turn around a little bit, sir. Okay, he is carrying something called a cutter sack. That is something in which he could keep some of his personal effects. On top of that, there is a cartridge box. If we go back, would you turn around, sir? He also has a pistol, a flintlock pistol in his waistband. You could move your gun up, sir. And he has what you call a belly box. All of the other people had cartridge boxes. They were hanging on the side. If you were a sailor, you used a box that was right in front of you, very easy to get to the ammunition. If you were boarding a ship or anything like that, everything was quite convenient. On his other side, he has a leather, what we call a hunting bag. It was also a bag to keep any of your possessions in. And on top of that, he has a beautifully engraved powder horn. Sailors made powder horns. They were at sea for many, many months, and it gave them something to do, and they could be sold or given to family when they returned to their port. On his head, he has a straw hat that is covered in tar, okay? This made it waterproof. It has the name of the ship right on the front of it, you know. I understand they were not very good in the hot weather because sometimes the tar used to kind of melt and drip a little bit. So maybe they weren't too great for the hot weather, but they were a normal thing that a sailor would have used. And in the very cold weather, he probably wore a knitted Voyager cap. But we thank you very much, Major Ferry, for coming in front of us, and have a good day. I will, oh. This wash lady, I don't know. Oh, my goodness.
We have a lot of fun, let me tell you, when we're out in the rain, the cold weather, the hot weather.
And the 100-degree
The
weather.
104-degree weather up in New Hampshire, but it is a lot of fun. Next, we have Captain Barilla Bessie. Captain Barilla Bessie was a ship's captain, adventurer, and was commissioned as a privateer
Woo-hoo.
by the state of Massachusetts. Along with Captain John Gibbs of Wareham and Captain Dimmick of Falmouth, he borrowed a boat from Nantucket, captured a British ship and all of its cargo in a matter of minutes.
Captain Bessie, you did a really good thing. In a matter of minutes, you took that British ship. Congratulations, sir. I would like you to notice how the captain is dressed. He is in a long, like a civilian type of coat. It was kind of farmer's coat pattern. It had buttons that button in the front. They could be closed. It is a warm coat for the winter. As you will see with some of the regimental coats and all, they didn't close like that. He is also wearing slops, like our previous model here. He has got, it looks like woolen garters to hold up his socks, and he has got period-correct shoes. In his belt, it looks like he has a flintlock pistol. Yes, it is a long one, too. And these would have been things that a sailor would have carried. What is the other item that you have? This looks like a club.
It's a cudgel.
Okay. You can imagine if there was fighting going on between different ships, a club like that would have been very handy if you wanted to hit somebody in the head and, you know, and put them down quickly. All right. He also is carrying a good-sized knife, which all of these things, where he was a privateer, okay, he was commissioned by the state to go out and raid British shipping. And he would need all of these things to make sure he could take control of those British ships and bring them back into port. What it didn't say here is when he brought them back into port and they sold all the things on the ship, he got a good share of the profits, and his crew got some of it too. So being a privateer for any state could be very dangerous, but it could be very profitable. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, so our privateer today brought some goods that probably he would have had back then. If you hadn't had a chance before you leave, just stop by and take a look at some of the things that they probably would have had. Next we have John Gibbs. John Gibbs was a lieutenant in the Wareham Militia, and he responded to the very first alarm from Wareham in April of 1775. He led the 4th Wareham Company of 25 men to the Fairhaven engagement. In 1790, he was promoted to captain. Besides the militia service on land, he served on board a ship with Captain Barilla Bessie, who captured a British vessel and captured the cargo in a very short battle in that borrowed boat from Nantucket. In the fall of 1776, he led the 4th Company of Massachusetts Militia to Newport, Rhode Island, to reinforce the colonial army for 3 months. This was with the assistance of Captain David Nye, and John Gibbs was a selectman in the town later on for 8 years.
As you can see, Mr. Gibbs is also dressed in proper colonial attire. He has got on buckle shoes, he's got long brown socks, and he's got the leather garters right on top of them to hold them up. He has on brown breeches, as they call them, and he has on a green waistcoat, of course with the buttons down the front, you know. He's wearing a brown tri-cornered hat, and these would be considered small clothes. And if you hear anything or you read a book called Small Clothes, these were considered a gentleman's small clothes. He could go out in public, but normally he didn't go too far in his small clothes. He would have had a coat or some other item on to finish what he was doing out in public. So we thank you very much, sir, for coming out.
So those of you who maybe go shopping at Shaw's or the stores over on Marion Road would know Gibbs Avenue. So this is the reference to John Gibbs. Next we have David Nye, Esquire. David Nye was captain of the 2nd Company of Plymouth, who responded to the Dartmouth alarm along with John Gibbs and 25 militiamen. One record shows that he was the co-owner of a schooner named Desire and was later commissioned as a privateer as the commander of the ship Seaflower. He served as a selectman for a total of 9 years, a justice of the peace, and a notary public for a year. He sold the land to Captain John Kendrick and was one of the founders of the Wareham Bank in 1833, having had the honor to be the first president of that bank.
Okay, as you can see that Mr. Nye is dressed a little bit fancier than some of the others, but considering, you know, all his accomplishments, you can understand he was a little more prosperous. He has on a gentleman's frock coat. It has 20 buttons down the front, it has 8 buttons on the flaps, and it has 8 more buttons down on his cuffs. As we said, gentlemen always liked buttons. He is dressed in a waistcoat, and he has a brown tri-cornered hat on him. He has the long socks, and he has the colonial shoes with that period of time. Although he had been a sea captain and apparently a Yankee privateer, you know, later on in life he became a very responsible person, especially founding and being in charge of a bank. Thank you very much for coming out, sir.
Next we have Dr. Andrew Mackey. Dr. Mackey was born in Southampton, Long Island, New York on July 12, 1742, and was the son of one Dr. John Mackey, who moved to Wareham in that year. He served as a much-needed teacher in school while practicing physics. Besides his medical practice, which he practiced for over 50 years, he collected the provincial taxes subject to the town's orders. Elected to the Committee of Correspondence, Inspection, and Safety in March of 1776, and then re-elected to the same committee in 1778, while also serving as an Army surgeon. In 1832, he helped from the first Health Committee, one of 9 members. For 32 years, he was the town clerk, keeper of records. All 3 of his sons also became doctors, and they were Dr. Andrew Jr., John, and Peter. Peter was also another one of the founders of the Wareham Bank in 1833. You might know, or you might not know, because I'm not sure a lot of people do know where Mackey's Bridge is. That's on Main Street, just before you get to the intersection where Old Main Street goes down the hill where the nursing home is. That bridge is Mackey's Bridge.
As you can see, the doctor is dressed a little bit differently. His waistcoat is longer than the ones that the other men were wearing. He is not dressed in a military style at all. He was a doctor. He was here in town to help people, and I'm sure he was a very highly respected person because of that. He has the long waistcoat on, of course, with all the buttons down the front. He has a white shirt, and he has a silk cravat around his neck. He's wearing a black tricorn, brown knee breeches, and brown knee socks. His uniform is definitely civilian. It has nothing to do with the military, and he was a great asset to the town of Wareham for many, many years, and his children followed in suit. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Next, we're going to bring out the drummer. The drummer played a very, very important part during the Revolutionary War. The drummer was often a youth, a young man or young adult familiar with many drum calls of the military. He usually was assigned to an officer, either with a militia company or with a full colonel army company. His job is almost as important as the officer. He is the one who relays all of the officer's calls to the troops. He drums the commands in camp and on the battlefield. The drum is much louder than the officers' wives or the voices, so all of the commands are given by the officer and played so that the soldiers can hear the drum. He is a non-combatant and may operate under a gentleman's agreement. That means that the opposing enemy will try to shoot the drummer, although the officers are the main targets. Many drummers rose in rank very quickly because of their importance of their position. We're going to ask the drummer to play a couple of samples of the commands that he would have played out on the field or in the camp in the morning at 6:30 when the sun comes up. This is the first thing that we hear because the drummer tells us it's time to get up out of the sleeping bags in bed. Yeah. So the first thing he's going to play is the commands that would relate to firing the muskets. So we're going to have the
Fire, cease fire.
we're going to have the priority to load their muskets, right? Yeah. Next, we're going to have make ready. That would be when the men would get their muskets ready to fire.
Yep.
And then he's going to drum present, and then fire. Thank you.
Very uneventful for fire. Sorry, guys. Just one bang. That's it. Yep.
So this is what tells the men when they're standing at attention with their muskets of getting ready for battle. Next is their turning commands. So first one is going to be left face, right face, right about. And that's how the soldiers would line up when they're going out to the battle line. So those are the commands that generally you would hear out on the battlefield as the men get ready to go to battle. So you want to do right about again. Okay. And our drummer is going to call everybody at the end and call everybody back on stage so you'll hear them. Anything else, Rob, that you wanted to do?
One command now is played as important on the battlefield was called ceasefire. And that would mean that when that was heard, accompanied by a fighter, if there was one, that would signal everyone to stop firing. Russia and cannon. And they would be played continuously until the fire would stop.
No.
Until everybody stopped firing on both sides of the field.
Okay, I would like to tell you something about, as you can see, he has a nice drum there. It's made of wood and rope and leather. These were the kind of drums that were carried during the American Revolution. Drums, of course, have been around for thousands of years, so it was an excellent way to communicate because it made a lot of noise and you could hear it for a long time. What he is wearing, he's wearing a black tricorn hat, and he has on a tan coat. That is called a bounty coat. He received that as payment for his services when he was up at the siege of Boston. The state of Massachusetts paid many of their soldiers that were in the siege of Boston with bounty coats. The towns had to make these coats and send them to Cambridge, and then they put buttons on them depending upon what unit you belonged to. The one on Rob's coat is 22nd, which is connected with the 13th flag over there. It was one of the units that made up the 13th Regiment. So he is entitled to wear a bounty coat. Bounty coat means you didn't get any pay, you got a coat. That is how important clothing was. This was usually done in October, okay? You can see he is carrying a sword. He does not carry a gun. He is basically a non-combatant. A sword could be carried by a musician for defensive action. If his officer was shot and went down, he would be the person who should stop and try to help the officer. If his officer was dead that he was accompanying on the battlefield, he would seek out another officer to give commands. He could drum the commands, but he couldn't give them himself. They had to come from an officer. That is why he was so important, because the communications in camp and on the battlefield were all given by the drummer. He rose in rank quickly, and there is a story that many of the drummers were corporals. And the reason they were called corporals is because if you've heard the term corporal punishment, drummers had very strong arms because they drummed all the time. And if someone was going to be punished with a lash, it was the drummer's job to lay on the lashes. So it was usually a corporal of the drum line who did it, and that is where the term corporal punishment came in. Thank you very much, Rob.
I think we're going to do the blacksmith and then the ladies.
Oh, okay.
Next we have Nathan Bassett. At the start of the war, Nathan may have been a blacksmith because he was requested to repair guns and make bayonets to fit the other guns for their bayonets. For this, he was paid 24 pounds, 16 shillings, and 6 pence. He responded to the Marshfield alarm and served 2 months in Roxbury. At some time, he was part owner of a ship that was used for privateering. This ship was very successful on its voyages as it captured some prize ships which were brought back to Wareham.
I would like you to look at our blacksmith. He is a really hard-working man, and he is dressed different from the other people you've seen out there. He is a very strong man, okay, because he deals with iron all the time. His clothes is, okay, yes, all right. His clothes are very comfortable, and they have to be very loose because of his profession. He is always moving around. He is wearing a leather apron. This is to protect him because he's always dealing with a fire or something like that. And he will wear the leather apron, okay? On his hat, on his head, he has a cotton or a linen cap to protect his hair from the sparks of the job he is working on. Yeah, well, most of his hair, okay? He was a very important part of the town. He repaired so many things that were of daily use in the town that every town, when they settled, really needed their own blacksmith. And luckily, Nathan was the one that chose Wareham, and he fixed their guns and their horse equipment and their equipment for their houses and their locks to fix their door and everything else. He was such an important part and a very valuable part of Wareham. Thank you very much, sir.
I think we have Captain Rufus Lincoln, then I think the ladies want to do it. Next, we have Captain Rufus Lincoln. Rufus Lincoln was known for raising a company of volunteers who marched from Taunton to Saratoga. He and his men were present at the Battle of Saratoga and witnessed the surrender of British General John Burgoyne Reports say that he heroically led his company at the Battle of Bemis Heights in Princeton. At some point, he was captured by the British in a battle near Philadelphia and held prisoner for a considerable amount of time. He was paroled in Flatbush, Long Island, New York, where he remained until the end of the war. After migrating to Wareham, he was able to acquire a 130-acre parcel of land which bordered the Wewiantic River. He later passed this property over to his son, Rufus. He is a descendant of Samuel Lincoln, who arrived in America in 1637. Some historians also believe that he is a descendant of Abraham Lincoln and Calvin Coolidge. Our model today is actually a fifth-generation great-grandson of Captain Rufus Lincoln.
Wow.
Do you want to describe it?
Okay, excuse me. All right, I would like you to notice something a little different on Captain Rufus Lincoln. He has a red sash around his waist, okay? Officers during the American Revolution, it was a sign to indicate they were an officer that they wore this big red sash. Also, the sash was very long, and it could be taken off if they were wounded on the battlefield. Where it was red in color, it didn't show the blood from the wound, and it could be used to carry them off the battlefield. He is attired in a beautiful woolen frock coat, as buttons are covered in wool to match the frock coat, which indicates he is a person of stature, okay? He has very impressive clothing on. He also wears a tri-cornered hat, and he is carrying a leather hunting bag, and it looks like he's got a long model brown Bess musket. Yeah. And, oh, it's a Fowler? Oh, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. Okay, he is carrying a fowling piece then. And on his socks, if you could turn to the side, we talked about clocks being embroidered on socks up above your ankles. Those are the socks he has on. Our other models didn't have them. This also indicates that he is a man of privilege and some money. So you can see by his whole attire that he is a gentleman and a very important part of the town. Thank you, sir.
Those of you who may know where Lincoln Hill is, if you came up through Wewiantic, straight up Hathaway Road, and got to the very top of the hill where there are stop signs, that house is the Lincoln House. I have had the pleasure of meeting with Dr. Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln many, many years ago when we had Antique Auto Club, and many of our potluck suppers were at that house, and it's what a treasure of a house. It's really an important piece of Wareham's history. So if you're going to the mall or coming back from the mall that way and you're at the stop sign, just take a quick peek and look at it. Really a long-term piece of Wareham's history.
Thank you.
Next we have Lieutenant Josiah Smith. Lieutenant Josiah Smith was born in South Hadley, Hampshire County, Mass. in 1754, and it is believed he came to Wareham when he was a teenager. He was not part of the original men from the militia that responded to the alarm on April 19, 1775. Josiah responded to the war as a second lieutenant through the Plymouth Militia. At that time, the towns were required to pay and provide for all of their militia units, and Wareham was small and probably could not afford to provide for many people. Plymouth was much larger then, and this is probably why he enlisted there. Or he may have had a friend who persuaded him to join there. He was one of the very few who were picked to be one of the infamous Commander-in-Chief's Guards, later called the Life Guards. These were General George Washington's personal protectors. They weren't a lifeguard. George Washington didn't have a swimming pool. These were George Washington's bodyguards. They had their own special hats and uniform color and were the very first troops to ever wear the USA cipher on their buttons. It is recorded that he participated in some of the most famous battles of the war. They include Trenton, Princeton, Saratoga, Bemis Heights, Monmouth Courthouse, Stony Point, and the most famous Yorktown with the surrender of Lieutenant Lord Charles Cornwallis. His name is shown later on Wareham's list of patriots. Upon his death, he was buried in Wareham with full military honors. Someone said at that time, this brave soldier sank to rest with all the countries honored, blessed.
All right, I would like you to take a look at our lieutenant in front of you. You can see he is dressed in a very military fashion. He is a member of the Continental Army, and as you've heard, he is a special guard to General George Washington. He has white pants on, and they, of course, have all the buttons that are required. He is also wearing gaiters over his shoes. This is if gaiters are really good things. If you're out in the mud or anything like that, and there were plenty of muddy roads, they will keep your shoes protected, and they will keep the shoes on your feet so the mud can't suck them off. So he's very wise to have his gaiters on his shoes. He is wearing a red vest, which looks a little different than most of the normal military uniforms you find of the period in the Continental Army, but that was because of his special place in the Army. He wore a red vest because he was part of Washington's Special Guard. He is wearing a blue and white regimental coat. This coat has turnbacks on the side, and there are hearts on the turnbacks, and that indicated loyalty and love of your country. He has many pewter buttons on his coat. I think they total 44 buttons because the militia and the regimental coats were very special. Women didn't get any of these, as we told you before, ladies, but when you were in the Continental Army, you were dressed very well if they could afford to supply you with a uniform. He is also carrying a Brown Bess musket, and he has a leather cartridge box, which would have filled out most of the rest of his uniform. On his back, he carries a haversack. This was like, well, like a lady's pocketbook in those days. You put all your equipment in it, and of course, he is also carrying a canteen. Canteens were part of every uniform from your militia to your continental soldier. You needed something to drink. And he is wearing a black hat that is, excuse me, trimmed in white. So he is a very handsome and well-acquired and well-dressed soldier to be with General Washington during the American Revolution. Thank you, sir. Oh, I forgot the brass thing. I didn't see it.
So Lieutenant Josiah Smith is buried down in Agawam Cemetery. If you go all the way down the end and come to the cemetery, it's almost a couple rows from the wall in. If you like to go out and research those things in, it's pretty easy to find. You'll find probably a flag. We do take care of it Memorial Day and make sure that he's well respected. Next we have John Galt. And his wife. So let me introduce you to John Galt, possibly a mariner from Brittany, France, who married Mary Moss on January 16, 1772 in Nantucket. They settled in West Wareham on 100 acres of land where he is listed as a yeoman, which would have been a farmer. Here he's wearing a farmer's frock, a long overshirt to protect his nicer clothing underneath. So underneath he has a shirt, a waistcoat, and breeches. He wears a printed cravat or a scarf around his neck to protect him from the sun, insects, and debris which might fall down his shirt. A straw bicorn hat also protects him from the elements and is cool in the summer. His wife Mary wears the clothing of a farm wife and uses a yoke to ease the burden of carrying water, wood, produce from the farm, and other materials necessary for farming and doing household chores. At the beginning of the Revolutionary War, he was one of 18 Wareham men who enlisted in the colonial army. He was stationed in Boston during the siege of Boston until the British evacuation. From there, they went to Upper New York to fight in the war against the defeat of the British General John Burgoyne's army. Soon after, along with 11 other Wareham men, went to Boston on a 3-month tour to guard prisoners of Burgoyne's army. On September 10th of 1779, as part of Captain David Nye's 2nd Wareham Company, he marched to Falmouth in response to an alarm there. In 1780, he, along with 11 other Wareham men, were sent to Rhode Island as part of the coastal defense. John's son, John Jr., also helped protect Wareham from the British attack on June 13, 1814, and by allowing the militia to dig an ambush trench on his property along the road to Carver in case the British returned to attack the Charlotte Furnace and Federal Furnaces in Carver. John Galt is being portrayed by Malcolm Finney, who is captain of the Wareham Minutemen and Militia, the same unit to which John Galt belonged during the Revolutionary War. And Captain Finney is a 7th-generation grandson of John Galt, and he still lives on a portion of the original 100 acres on Galt Road. With him is his wife. It's portraying Mary Morse Galt as Captain John Galt's wife, Mary.
You going to read that?
Yeah, you want to drive.
Oh, okay. Mary is wearing a blue gown shirt, a blue check scarf, a cap, a blue stockings, and a market hat. Okay. She is also carrying a yoke. I don't know if any of you have ever used a yoke. It is a very handy thing. If you're carrying water or other things, it makes it much easier on your arms because your shoulders do all the work. Every farm probably had one of those in their bond because they were that universally popular at that point. As you can see, our gentleman went from a farmer with a long farmer's frock unto a militiaman in a frock coat and carrying a musket. This is what the people did. They left their normal jobs, their normal life behind, and they joined the American Army to make America free. Thank you.
I guess we're going to bring out the ladies, and we're going to do Annie and Michelle.
Okay,
first.
all right.
So the Revolutionary War wasn't just about the men. The ladies played an important role as well. If the men went off to war, the ladies oftentimes had to stay back at the farm and take care of the farm and the children. And if they didn't have a farm and children to take care of, oftentimes the ladies would follow the war, and they were called camp followers. And so they played an important part actually out around the battlefield as well. So we're going to bring out a couple ladies, and we're going to bring out some ladies as well. So we have our infamous
Wash lady.
laundress.
That's me.
And our camp follower. And I guess we're going to let them tell their story. Testing. Would you like to use the microphone?
Can you all hear me okay?
We are going to use this because it, and I will help you.
I have a bigger mouth.
I have a big mouth too, but it's going to be okay. Could you please help me with this backpack?
Certainly.
For those of you who came a little bit earlier, you would have felt the heaviness of my backpack. And I'm going to let my friend Annie tell you all about her story first. While she's doing that, I'm going to kind of just play with this a little bit. So go ahead, Annie.
Okay. Here. Hold that for a minute. If I need it, I'll take it. Okay?
I'm going to do this.
Oh, God. As I said, good day, everyone. Get that thing out of my face. As Michelle said, my name is Ann. I am a camp follower. I come from the town of Rehoboth. I lived on a farm in Rehoboth with my husband and my 2 sons. Before the War for Independence broke out, we worked the farm. We had a good life. We were happy. We had enough to eat. We had a house. we had warmth. However, we also still believed in the fight for independence. So once the Declaration of Independence was signed, the militia came to our door. They knocked on the door, and again, we believed in the cause. So my husband and my two sons, who were 17 and 18, had to join the militia. At that time, if you were a male and you were the age of 16, you had to join the Army if they came to your door, okay? And again, we believed in it. So my husband and my two sons, they joined the militia. Now I have a problem because I have this huge farm in Rehoboth that I really can't run by myself. And I don't have family around, I don't have any daughters, we don't have any hired help. So I decide that I am going to go with my husband and my sons. So I become what is known as a camp follower, okay? And it is a very difficult life. There is nothing that is easy about this life. The nice farmhouse that we have, we no longer sleep in. We sleep in a tent. Now, my husband and I are very lucky because the size of our tent is very, very small. But he and I, because we are a married couple, we can share that tent, and we don't have to share it with anyone else. The soldiers that are single one of those tents, they rotate through 6 men in a 24-hour period. So the fact that we have our own tent is really a luxury that we have. What the Army also gives me is a ration of food every day. So I have a couple of things. I have shelter over my head. Yes, it is a tent, but it is shelter. And then I have food. Not a lot of food, but it is wartime. The Army is the priority. The females are thought of afterwards. But I did get some food every day. Unfortunately, there was a big battle one day. And in that battle, my husband and my two sons were killed. I now become a war widow. There was nothing in place at that time to take care of families that were left behind if a soldier died. There was a battle going on. War is not pretty. War is not kind. It isn't now. It wasn't then. So I now have a choice to make. I can go home. The problem with going home is that I'm hundreds of miles from Rehoboth. I don't know how to get there, and I'm by myself. So really going home is not an option for me. So what I'm going to do out of necessity is I'm going to follow the Army, but I'm going to stay way in the back. And I am just trying to make myself as invisible as I can, okay? And I am going to survive every day the best that I can. Now, I have some ways that I'm able to get some items. And what I do is I barter with other people.
Oh, I do need something from you.
You do?
I do.
What would you like to barter for?
Actually, I have this beautiful knife.
You do?
Yeah, actually, let's see. You can't have this one. How about this one?
This
Would
is
that work
very
for you?
nice. It would work for me. What would you want from me?
If I give you this, where is this? Oh, here it is. Would you take this, and I have a bottle off in the woods, and would you put urine in the bottle for me, please?
Urine?
Urine. Just pee in
Urine,
it and
just-
bring the bottle back, okay? In the meantime, I'll just kind of do my thing. so-
And I can have the knife if I put urine in the tin.
Absolutely.
I
the
will
knife
be
is yours.
right. I will be right back. Beg your pardon.
Thank you, Ann. So while she's doing that for me, you saw me unpack my things. I'm a camp follower. This is what I would carry on my back. It's the only thing that I have. The Army is not allowed to carry any of my stuff for me. So do you see a tent? No. I have the 2 blankets. I have an extra shift. I have an extra, this apron is a wool apron, so I use that one when I do cooking. This one, highly inflammable, but I use this one when I'm doing the laundry and stuff because it's much lighter. As you can see, both Annie and I are not wearing shoes. I am very lucky, I do have shoes. Annie does not. However, my shoes I'm going to save as much as possible. So if I don't have to wear them, I'm not going to wear. Oh, darling, you are the best. Thank you so much. Okay. Oh. Sorry. Sorry about that, Annie. I'll give you something else. Do you need anything else?
Yeah, a husband?
I can't help you with that, darling. No, but you know what? There is one guy that doesn't have any teeth. He might be very good for you.
Really?
Yeah. Ask him.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to finish yours?
It'll only take me 2 seconds, and then you go back. Excellent. So the things that I have here, and I'm just going to go quickly over why I needed her urine. This actually is 1700s Clorox. So it actually takes out, and this is my urine, okay? And it actually does take out stains. And when you have all white, which basically most of the officers and everything, they're white pants, I would never touch a jacket. I would never touch their vest unless it was really, really dirty, and I would not use this on colors, okay? But it takes out stains. Does it stink? Oh my God, it stinks. It's awful. And that's how I get people to come over and see me most of the time, because they see me, I'm not pretty. Annie is not pretty. You're beautiful, honey. You're beautiful. You're just not pretty, okay? We don't have the fancy clothes. You can tell I'm not wearing stays. I'm a working girl. I do laundry 24/7, no matter what. They're supposed to pay me. They don't. So if they don't pay us, what do, Annie? We go and we steal their drinking water, right? Yeah, because girls got to do what a girl's got to do. Absolutely. This is my hammer. What they would do is they would wet the clothes, they would put some soap on it, and then I don't want to carry all the stuff that I would have from my house, like a cauldron and all that stuff. This is what I would use. So everything was cold cleaned. I didn't use hot water. And what you do is you put a lot of the soap, and that's what's in here. It's lye soap, and you'd scrub it, and then you take this and I'd bang it on my bowl, okay? Sometimes I'd use my pan, but that gets the white black. I learned that the hard way. So you have to put another thing over it if you're going to do that. But the bowl works fine, and that's how I clean. The rest of it, you hang it out? No, they didn't hang it out, not most of the time. Put it on the grass, in the sun. You have the sun bleaching it that way, and you have the grass letting off oxygen, bleaching it the other way. It works great, and it smells wonderful. Okay? So Annie, no, you can't have that, darling. No, that belongs to the blacksmith. You got to leave that there. Okay.
This is what she does when we're in camp. She goes around.
Acquiring goods that are no longer needed.
I don't know, my apple would have tasted good then.
It's a fine hat, is it not? Sir, would you be interested in a fine hat? No? Okay. So,
Annie's also cute. She has a little dog that she brings with her. His name is Snack.
yes. And do you know why his name is Snack? Thank
Makes
you.
a great snack.
Because dog makes a fine meal. Poor Snack. Again, as I said, war is not fun and it is not pretty. Okay, so, and we like to make light a little bit. We are by no means making fun of the situation whatsoever. Yes. So I have some items here in my cart, and I take these items and I go to my fellow reenactors, some of which are actually some fine ladies who used to be my neighbors. So these are a very fine pair of woolen socks. Does anyone have need for woolen socks? No? Ladies, woolen socks? No? Okay.
No sale.
I have a fine pocket. Now, did we just discuss the lady's pocket?
Yes, we did. with
We
our
have
first
discussed.
model. Yes.
This pocket, I actually made this when I had better means and my husband was still alive. I embroidered this pocket. So what I can do now is I can use this pocket to show potential husbands, if I could find one, that I have the gift of sew. So I know how to sew, and that is evidenced by the fact that I embroidered this pocket.
Maybe I could trade this.
That is a beautiful fan. This is a beautiful fan. Ma'am, would you be interested in a barter for the fan? Okay. This is a very pretty lace fan. This fan came from Colonial Williamsburg. This fan is the last item that my husband gave to me. This is all that we have left of our life in Rehoboth. And our time together is this fan. So I ask you, would I trade this fan? No. Would I trade this fan if I could eat for a day? Yes. I would. As special as this is to me, it is more important that I can find some food so that I could make it through a few days. Okay? I also have a man's leather belt. This is a very sturdy belt. This belt has two purposes. It's good for wearing, it's better for whooping. Okay? Are there any youngins here today? I could demonstrate. No? You would be surprised how many people.
And the sad truth is that Annie got that off of that soul.
I'm going to get to that.
Let's go.
Okay, okay. I have a pair of shoes, okay? These are probably the most valuable thing that I own, are these pair of shoes right here. So, all these things I have, and I go around to the camp and I barter and I try to offer my services to cook or to sew, and just to get through the day. Now, people ask me where I got the items from. Some of them, as I said, are my own. And some of them, when there's a battle, not everyone makes it. Not every soldier makes it through that battle alive. And they have things that they don't need anymore, and I do. And I need to make it through the day. Now, there was a time in my life when I was as fine as these ladies. And I am a very proudful woman. I may not look at it as only circumstances that have made it the way that I am right now. But I am a very prideful woman. I am not happy that this is the way that I have the items that I do. And if it's during the battle, I could potentially be shot by the British, and I could also be shot by the colonial forces because what I was doing was thought to be so deplorable. There is one way that I can make my circumstances better. Does anybody have any idea how that might be? If I could find myself another husband, then I would get that tent, and then I would get a ration of food. Most days, I care about how am I going to eat and where am I going to sleep, not how pretty I look. Okay, so I do what I have to do just to make it through the day. I also would like you to know that if there are any single men Are there any single men? Married. We're all married. You're all married. You're all married. Guaranteed you're all married. Okay. Might there be? Oh, there. Hello. Excuse me. Are you feeling well?
Yeah, pretty well, yes.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Does he have teeth? Do you have teeth, sir?
Yes.
Could I see?
See?
Potential. Okay. So the only way for me to make my situation better is if I can find myself another man. Now, we also do school programs. And I like to end my story this way. When we do the school programs, they're usually 4th graders, 8th graders. And that is this: when you go home tonight and you sit down at your table, at your dining room table, and a meal is placed in front of you, or when you go home tonight and you go into your comfortable bed with that roof over your head, and it is raining and you're not getting wet, you be grateful for the things that you have, because it is people like myself and these people behind me and the people from the past that made it so that you could have and we could have what we have today. So I bid you a good day.
And yes, when I'm at encampments, I do laundry. And I do get paid for it. So it was 15 shillings or something, and like I said, if they didn't pay us, we just steal their drinking water, because it was a lot easier for them to go with the, the barrels and the horses than it was for us to go with the 2 barrels and bring gallons of water back. So we just used to steal it. Excuse me. No. We did not barter for that, ma'am. What would you like to barter for? I will give it to you. I want the fan. Can I have the fan?
No.
I'll give you my bar of...
The fan is a tent. I will barter the fan and the shoes for a tent. Do you have a tent to barter?
I have a blanket.
No, a tent.
No, sorry.
Good day.
May I have my jug back too then? I didn't miss it. So we want to thank you all for listening to our little spiel. Back to the ladies.
Okay, now that we've had our very educational entertainment of working women in the American Revolution, we're going to deal with some of the other clothing that was worn by people in other occupations, shall we say, during that time period. The first lady we have up is Miss Leslie. As you can see, could you step forward, please? Don't run Michelle over, just, Yeah. She is dressed as a very prosperous lady in a day dress, all right? This would have been something that would have been worn in town. She is not going out in the fields to do any work or anything like that. Her husband is no doubt a learned man. He has a good occupation. He can read and write, and he has a profitable income. Therefore, she can be dressed in a lovely day dress. This is something she would wear when she probably went off to church or went into the lady gatherings or anything like this. This is a blue linen dress. It is closed in the front with hooks and eyes, okay? Down the front of the bodice has hooks and eyes. You can see on the top of the bodice there are some pleats. That is her chemise, and it is a fancier one. On her arms, the cuffs of her chemise coming out of her day dress are also fancy, and they are layered, and they are very pretty. She has on, with her blue linen day dress, a printed skirt or a petticoat. Printing was more expensive than solid colors. It was done with blocks of wood, and it was printed individually. So if you had something that was printed, it means it was a much more expensive piece of cloth. And this is why she is accenting her lovely outfit with a printed petticoat. Also, she has considerations on her hips, which draw her skirt up more. As you can see, it is billowing under the considerations. That was a definite sign of someone of class, because that was the style of the day. On her hat, she has a felt hat on top of her white cap, which also has a satin ribbon on it. She wears a modesty scarf around her neck, as all of the others have done. And this is an example of a well-to-do lady who lived in the town of Warren during our period. Thank you, Miss Leslie. Okay. Now we have one of our ladies that is dressed as a working woman, okay? There were two types of jackets that most of working women wore. One was called a short gown, although it was not a gown, and the other was called a bed jacket, okay? This lady has on a bed jacket. It's similar to what we saw on the men that they wore, the long farmer's shirt. Well, this is the woman farmer's version. It's called a bed jacket. It is long, okay? It is very easy to build, very easy to make up, and she could wear that working around in the farm or in the store or wherever she happened to be working. She has got on a linen petticoat, and she has on an apron that is also made of linen. Aprons were very important to farm families because when you went out in the field to gather apples or potatoes, you could put them in your apron and just kind of bring it up, and you could carry them right in. You didn't have to bring a bucket or anything with you. She is also wearing a white linen cap to cover her hair because, as we talked about, you didn't wash her hair too often, so it was best to keep it covered whenever possible. She has on a checked modesty scarf so that the sun will not burn her neck or her chest or anything like that. And she is a typical working woman of a farm here in Wareham, and hopefully she has a long and prosperous life. Thank you. Okay, our next model, could you please step out? Our next model is wearing colonial shoes with high stockings, as you can see them on her. She has a very pretty modesty scarf around her neck that has some fancy trimming on it. They could be done with fancy trimming or they could be left plain. It was all depending upon what was available to you. She is wearing a blue linen skirt and a blue linen blouse. It also covers her elbows, as you can see, because ladies did not show their elbows in those days. She has on an apron, which she could use for versatility as she is working in the home with the children and with the farm. She has on a white cap, as all caps in those days were white or off-white. They didn't have any checked ones. They didn't have any red ones or green ones or anything. It just wasn't done. It had to be white or off-white. And that was just a style thing for that time period. Okay, thank you. And our next lady is coming out here, and she also has on a day dress, I guess we would call it. Yes, I guess this would be called a day dress. It is long, and it is made out of printed fabric, which means it is probably her fancy and her favorite day dress. Printed fabric, as I said, was very, very expensive. I'm looking, that almost looks like a Williamsburg print to me, but I can't be sure. She has on a white modesty scarf and also a white cap. She is wearing stays under her dress, which was, this made the top of your dress fit according to the style of the day. So it was snug around your waist and everything like that. Your stays helped you with your back, control your bust, and everything else. They were a common thing that many, many women in many classes of society wore at that point. She has on a lovely maroon linen skirt, which picks up the colors of the printing in her dress, okay, with her white modesty scarf to protect her neck and her shoulders. She is well attired, and as you will also see, her elbows are covered because she doesn't want to be a hussy and expose her elbows. So she is a very good lady. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to bring everybody up.
Okay. All right, can everyone please come out on the stage? Everybody that is still here? Everyone please come up here.
Okay, if we can have everyone that has participated today, please come out on the stage. ladies up front. Too close? Too close. Yeah, Rob, if you want to do assembly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you for coming out today. I hope that you enjoyed our presentation and that you've learned a little bit about the history of Wareham and why some of the areas of town. I think actually we found, how many, Howie, Red War soldiers total? 41 Revolutionary War soldiers. So today we did about 21.
My research, I came up with 251 men who fought the Revolutionary War over the 8-year period from when.
So we have a lot to be thankful for where we are today because of these brave soldiers. I want to thank my fellow reenactors. We have the pleasure of sharing events with them, both Fairhaven and Rehoboth. As we said earlier, Israel Faring went over to Fairhaven when the British were attacking New Bedford Harbor, and the Fairhaven militia weren't well prepared and were a little skeptical about staying around. So Israel Faring went over and gathered them up, brought Wareham's militia over, and helped save the town of Fairhaven. So we have a real connection. We love to go over there and do our reenactment. There is a big plaque over there that honors Israel Faring. If you have never been over there, it's really an enjoyable place to come and visit. I believe first week in June? First weekend in June, we'll be there as an encampment. I'm not sure that we'll be firing the cannons. Cannon powder has been very difficult to get. But there are 5 cannons over there. We will set up, be there all day Saturday. We will be doing cooking. We do cook over the fire. Our laundress is also our camp cook, and let me tell you, we eat really well. I think our last event when we went to New Hampshire, we cooked 2 17-pound turkeys with all the fixings. So we do. We live that life for the weekend. So if you've never been to an encampment, there are many going on throughout almost every weekend. Somewhere in Massachusetts, you'll find some of the militia groups that are camping out. Even up in New Hampshire, there's some. So if you're out vacationing and you see something, I encourage you to go and visit and learn about the life that happened back then. So I want to say thank you all. Please take a bow. And thank you all for coming. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to turn the mic over to those that can answer them for you. Happy to come out with a microphone if you have a particular question, and we'll see if we can answer it for you. I know at one of the events we did, we had a lot of really great questions afterwards, so.
So the more the better.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Pounds. When did we go to dollars?
Oh, I have no idea. Howie, you know? When we went to dollars?
Yeah, I think it was in the 1790s it started.
What was that, Michelle?
When we went to from pounds to dollars.
Of course, there was currency printed during the American Revolution.
I don't know.
And they called it continental currency.
Yeah, that was.
Continental currency wasn't worth anything, and some of the soldiers used to put it in their hats and use it to light their pipes, because that is what the first paper money issued by America was worth. So if they say it's not worth a continental, this is what it looked like, and it wasn't worth anything. So eventually, by the late 1700s, something that had a value to it was issued by our government. But most people still like to deal in foreign currency and gold and silver. It was much safer. Even the British pound was well accepted by the American soldiers.
How did the women get to their pockets? Like if they had to pay for something?
big slit. So you know how we put the thing on front to back? You have a slit right here, and then you just reach in, and your pocket is right here.
I can never find my pocket.
It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Thank you. That's okay. Anybody else have a question? Ooh, we got one up here.
Who manufactured the muskets?
Gentlemen, who manufactured the muskets?
Manufactured them?
Yes.
Most
Yeah.
of them came over from England. They were actually produced by the King's Armourer. And if you ever heard of the Tower of London, that was his armory, which made guns, bayonets, swords, all of their artillery. Once the firearms were in this country, we had many, many blacksmiths, similar to ours, and almost every town had one. They started reproducing firearms, very similar to the British Brown Bess. There was a group called the Committee of Safety, which back then, that's what they were for. We would probably look at that as the Department of Defense today. They were the ones who ordered firearms. And pretty much every town probably had somebody that produced firearms. And my best comment when I do a reenactment and I have multiple firearms out there is because we were copying the British Brown Bess and the French Charleville. Yeah, right. Got to have a Frenchman here, right? The French. It's a good thing we didn't have patent lawyers back then. So.
They had various gunsmiths too that would recycle parts. They would get a bunch of barrels here, maybe some locks, and they'd put them all together. Oh, look at that. And
Don't give it to Annie.
no, I mean, a blacksmith could do that, but there were gunsmiths that they specialized, depending where you were, I mean, in that business. Like clockmakers, they did everything. They did the barrels, they did a lot of times they'd import parts and didn't make things on their own. And they put it all together, lock, stock, and barrel, they say, right? You heard that, right? But yeah, I mean, a small town might have a gunsmith, probably a blacksmith for sure would be able to do something. Like mostly repair the stuff that the British Army was getting rid of. They would, that was outdated or broken, and the Committee of Safety or whatever, they would, we'll take that for the militia, and they put it all back together and make it sort of, functional. Hard things to get, like certain parts with bayonets, they had to make those and repair those. So
Cool.
it was a hodgepodge.
Thank you. Another question. Okay. we
Here
have-
in Wareham, we have some original records, and what it says in there is that each soldier has to be outfitted with a steel or iron ramrod. Well, many of the guns the soldiers had, which are their own guns, had wooden ramrods. Wooden ramrods break. If your ramrod breaks, your gun is useless. So it was more or less mandated by the Committee of Safety or by the Continental Congress that each soldier would have a metal ramrod, iron or steel, and it was made by the local blacksmith.
Okay, we have an update from somebody who Googled that stuff. That 1792 was when America moved to the dollar and not the pound. So, 1792. We have another question up here.
Where did the black powder come from?
It was made locally. Many of the shops did it. It was a process to break it down. It's carbon, saltpeter, and sulfur, and it's very explosive. Right now, the reenactors, we're praying to find black powder. There was a company out in the Midwest that had produced it for years and years and years, but with all of the stigma going around regarding firearms, et cetera, the company decided to close its doors. But one of the also things I would like to say is there was a couple of comments made that Blacksmith mentioned. Hold that. He mentioned lock, stock, and barrel. This happens to be at what they call full top. This is half top. Have you ever heard the expression, don't go off half top? Yeah. Okay, and this is the reason. At that stage, that's a safety. You can pull the trigger all you want, nothing. And this is modified so it's not going to spark. That's what happens. All right, although we have wooden flints in here for demonstration purposes only. So don't go off half cock because your gun might not work. Here's mine.
Flash in the pan, yeah.
Okay, so we have
pan.
another question.
Thank you. It's so cold up here in the winter, so I was wondering what both the ladies and the men would wear if they had overcoats of any kind.
Yeah, the ladies actually, most of us do have woolen capes that we have. I think we didn't bring them because it was so warm out, but we do have, and then you would also wear 3 or 4 petticoats, a couple of which underneath probably were woolen petticoats to keep you warm.
And as for the camp follower, she used her blanket. Any other questions?
He's got on wool and he's perspiring very heavily.
The men wore something called break coats or watch coats or something like that. And they were very heavy, long coats, and they had big collars and all on them. During the American Revolution, there weren't that many of them. So whoever was going out on guard duty that night wore the coat that was assigned to that unit. So you shared the coat. So it had many, many owners to it. And that is how important wool and warm coats were. But considering the temperatures outside during the winter, and many of the regimental coats, like you see here, were very threadbare later in the war, it was necessary to have something warm. And it even got to the point where they used to put blankets over the great coats or the watch coats because they were wearing thin too. But let's face it, the French came and joined us, and they brought us a different kind of coat. It was similar to that, and it was called a lottery coat. And after that, many of our troops were much warmer, thank you to the French king. Let me get it right, the French king, yes.
And when we do reenactments, I will tell you, for myself, I have 3 wool blankets in my tent because it does get cold. And I will, because it's at night and no one's really looking in my tent, I probably will have a couple of pair of socks on too.
No, you only got 2 left now.
Mac, you can do
Did you
something
take my
about
socks?
Rochester that's coming up? Rochester that's coming up. Could you say something about that, please?
The town of Rochester has never had a memorial to its its Revolutionary War soldiers, and they had over 200. So recently, the Historic Commission decided to have a monument made, which has been made. And on May 7th at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, she's responsible for that because she first told me 1 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, we're going to have a ceremony, and some of us here, Wareham Militia, and hopefully from Rehoboth and Fairhaven, will be there as the honor guard, and we will fire salutes honoring these soldiers. So if you can make it, it'd be great.
Thank you. Anything else? No, again, I want to say thank you, and if you want to, we'll go out in the hallway if you want photos. I know one of the things when we do encampments, people come up and say, usually it's the men, can we have a photo? So if you want to take a picture, I'm sure that they would be willing to pose for you. You're willing, or if you have other questions that you want to ask anyone in particular, feel free to do it.
Nobody ever wants pictures with us.
But again, yeah. So I want to say thank you. We appreciate it. We appreciate the grant that we got from the Cultural Council and the community events that allowed us to put this together here. So again, I encourage you. We'll be over to Fairhaven the first weekend in June. Please stop by and come over and bring the young ones. And
I want to ask for a big round of applause for Claire and Howie for putting this together with the help of others. They went above and beyond. They did a lot of work. Howie, get over
He
here.
does.
Give us both a hug with one of those big paws of yours. Hey, come on, around my shoulder too, man. He's my dad.
Yeah, he's the one that did all the work this winter researching and loves history, loves Wareham history, and so we're happy that he was able to do it. We're happy that we're able to bring it to you. And now when you go to Lincoln Hill or Galt Road or Mackey's Bridge, maybe this will go off in your head that I know where that came from. So again, join us out in the what do they call it? Lobby. Sorry, been a long day. Join us out in the lobby. We're happy to talk with you for a little bit.